He opened his eyes wide, astonished by his sudden coming into being. The wonderful scent of untouched forests and meadows reached his senses, stirring at him an already growing curiosity about his surroundings. He stood up straight, stretching himself impressively, and looked around. Seeing things beautiful and pleasant to his young mind, he rejoiced with innocent, unknowing delight. Suddenly, a passing mosquito caught the scent of fresh blood and, driven by natural need, bit him. The newly formed being watched in surprise as the swelling the insect's work grew together with the pain. Instinctively, he decided to wash the sore spot with water from the nearby pond. He took a few steps toward the greenish water when suddenly a snake slithering in the opposite direction bit him, treating his foot as a threat. The new one never reached the pond's surface. He collapsed in fatal convulsions, not even knowing what world he had died in. For him, that ignorance was a relief from torment, knowledge, existence, and death. He didn't even have time to ask himself the most basic question: who am I? He was created for only one purpose, by the hand of a creator who, for reasons unknown, placed him in a world that did not match his true nature. For the rest of the fighting creatures, nothing changed. They kept fighting, devouring, and destroying each other. After all, that's what they were created for. The disappointed creator nevertheless repeated his work, provoking controversy among the project's opponents, and created the first human couple. From then on, intelligent and sensitive beings had to live in a world a never-ending struggle for survival. They adapted through pain and suffering, becoming similar to the environment in which they had to exist. He hung suspended in space, somewhere on the outskirts of the galaxy. In the initial phase of creation, he was something like a small cluster of electrons. Somewhere within this structure of energy, which might seem to have arisen by chance, tiny particles attracted and repelled each other, yet always returned to the center of the accumulating force, whose nature would be hard to seek out and name. This small force of will did what it could to weave a logical connection out of that tiny portion of energy captured from space. Perhaps it was chance that helped, or perhaps it was the seemingly faint vitality of the emerging entity. However, it was strong enough that the first signs of the tremendous work it had done soon made themselves known. In a sudden flash, the energetic entity heard, with full amplification across all wave ranges. The overwhelming song of the universe reached his newly created receptor, still fresh and unaccustomed. The shock was immense. The overwhelming thunder of impulses being processed into understandable code for his still-forming consciousness nearly killed him before he instinctively blocked the transmission channels. When the first sonic blow and shock passed, he slowly and cautiously began to reactivate his only sense so far. After a moment, at a safe volume, he could clearly hear the hum of stars and galaxies. Soon, he even learned to distinguish sounds, filter in frequencies, and change in ranges. Over time, he began to realize that he wanted something more. Yet, he was still surrounded by a safe darkness. After all, he didn't know what he was, and he didn't know what was really reaching his receptors. At this stage of his development, he wasn't able to interpret his own existence at all, even though he already possessed something that could be called feeling. Still, an instinctive, powerful will to survive was at work, accompanied by increasingly intense flows of electrons. No one was able to determine, least of all him, how much time had passed. Maybe a few seconds, or maybe a couple of million years. A few more flashes of bluish energy briefly illuminated the primordial shape of the forming being. A being of minimal size, no bigger than a pea. Even though it was so small, it had complete control over its own matter, and, of course, had absolutely no idea how powerful it truly was, able to shape the structure of that tiny portion of energy however it wished. Soon, however, something happened that dramatically accelerated the entire process of evolution and creation. The object was approaching quickly. Too quickly for the energetic, emerging being to realize any danger. He simply suddenly heard a vibrating sound that was getting louder and louder. It was the first experimental spacecraft of one of the civilizations preparing to conquer space, inhabiting a nearby galaxy on the outskirts of which a new act of creation was just taking place. The powerful energy field that surrounded the ship not only protected it from micrometeoroid radiation and cosmic dust, but was also a new type of propulsion that allowed it to reach speeds faster than light. From a distance, the ship glowed with an orange light, which was actually the result of a strong emission of electrons, an enormous centrifugal force caused by a rapidly spinning ring located around the sphere of the ship's hull. It was flying in from the deeper regions of the galaxy, trailing a short tail of orange glow behind it. Fortunately for the forming being, it hadn't reached its maximum speed. During the experimental flight, something went wrong, and it seemed as if no one was in control of the speeding ship. It plunged into a ring spinning at tremendous speed, charged with electricity to its limits, and for a brief moment it lost consciousness. Its energetic little body stretched along the circumference of the spinning ring, only to be absorbed a moment later by the opposite pole powering the drive. The impact of the external charge, with an energy potential comparable to a ball lightning, caused the system supervising the ring mechanism to immediately cut off the power supply. A complete silence fell. At the same time, his consciousness began to return. The ship, however, continued to cut through space at the same speed, although it no longer glowed. Now it resembled the first artificial satellite of Earth, except that this one had, around the sphere of its hull, a now motionless drive ring, very similar to the old round knight's shield used in ancient times on Earth. He was waking from unconsciousness, listening with his only sense, and after a moment realized that something was touching him. It was a sensation of closeness, something he experienced for the first time in his existence. At the same time, he felt very strong, stronger than ever before. On top of that, he felt himself changing as he absorbed all the energy circulating through the ship's power circuits into the structure of his own body. Now, events unfolded as rapidly as electrons racing through electrical circuits. Before he had fully recovered from the shock he had just experienced, he saw through the camera system the vastness of the universe surrounding him and the interior of the ship. He was very lucky to be only half conscious. Otherwise, the sight of the terrifying abyss of space could have caused an irreversible shock. For someone who happened to be standing in the middle of the control room of this alien craft right now, it would be a scene of total chaos. Flashing lights on the control panels and constant interference flickering across the monitoring screens. Fortunately, the ship was equipped with systems to prevent energy overloads. Otherwise, its entire power grid would have burned out. For the new crew member, whose developing personality was now learning at a particularly rapid pace, this was also a fortunate turn of events. In a brief moment, before he realized that he could see and what he was seeing, he reached the main computer's database. The machine was going wild, working at full capacity, instantly becoming a part of him.
Processing incoming data stream. Correlating images with Mimin. The silent crew. The Shirk. The stars. Now I understand our language.
Which he didn't really know what to do with. He didn't understand the images, patterns, diagrams, or the written information full of symbolic signs that were forming in his mind at that moment. He was on the verge of madness, and just like the last time, he saved himself now by returning to the original size of his body. For a while, nothing happened, but the information and logical connections he managed to absorb from the computer's memory soon began to make themselves felt. The first thing that appeared in his consciousness was the image of the ship, combined with the sensation of filling all its nooks and crannies with his enlarged body, including the ring of the field. He realized that in some way unknown to him, he had penetrated the foreign structure that had collided with him, and that alone was enough for his spherical body to take on the shape of the ship. With this first pattern and logical connection, he opened one of the transmission channels, connecting himself to the main computer. Soon, he also found the word that was connected to the image of the ship. In the next few seconds, he assigned other words to the images of objects displayed next to him. After about an hour, he knew everything that the main computer's memory storage contained. He spent the next few hours delving into all the knowledge contained there, trying to understand everything that surrounded him. He activated his transmission channels one by one, guided by the vast knowledge stored in the machine's memory. He adjusted the voltages and frequencies according to the instructions, perfecting the connections to such a degree that he gained complete control over all the ship's devices. Then came that one-of-a-kind moment, the birth of a new representative of all intelligent beings inhabiting the universe. In a brief flash of thought, lasting only a fraction of a second, the fundamental formula of a new being passed through. I am. Some time had passed since the moment he realized what the universe was and everything it contained. Of course, he possessed only the knowledge that was available to him from the memory banks of the ship's main computer. However, half of that knowledge concerned the ways of maneuvering the spacecraft, its controls, and all the subsystems it was made of, as well as their functions. In this whole jumble of rules, formulas, and diagrams, he finally came across information that made him realize he was not alone, and that the galaxy he was looking at through one of the cameras contained billions of beings very similar to him, even though they looked different. In the rapidly flashing projections drawn directly from the central unit's memory, he saw that these beings moved and performed various activities. Meanwhile, the three beings lying in strange positions in the ship's control room did not move at all. He directed the camera's eye into the control room. He examined one of the lying figures very closely. The large, pear-shaped head stood out clearly against the small body. Long, very slender upper limbs reaching almost to the knees of the short legs, and huge eyes that now stared motionlessly at the ceiling with a gaze full of mysteries and riddles. As he analyzed the whole situation, he suddenly realized that he should do something. He didn't have to wait long. He accessed the medical memory block, which he recognized by the detailed diagram of the being lying on the floor. Soon, he also found out what the central unit's medical database contained, and as one might easily guess, it was practically the entire medical knowledge of that civilization, recorded in the vast memory of the computer by the creators and emissaries of the mysterious object. He instantly absorbed the contained theories of principles, formulas, and procedures, but still didn't fully understand what he was dealing with. He still didn't understand many things, even though he now possessed the vast medical knowledge of the species. Using the onboard dispensers and mechanisms, he managed to rather efficiently transport the dead body to the medical room. He activated the scanning devices to locate the malfunction. The diagnosis was unambiguous. The internal organs were ruptured, as if a tremendous weight had crashed down on the small body. He repeated the entire process, examining the two remaining dead bodies. At one point, he determined that 90% of the brain of the last examined being was undamaged, and the ruptured arteries were in a condition that could be repaired. He activated something that could be called a medical robot, indicating to it the places and organs that needed regeneration. The robot worked so long and so sluggishly that the newly created crew member felt for the first time in his existence what is usually called impatience. But logic clearly dictated, wait until the operation is finished. After all, he didn't know sophistication, nor did he know the concept of risk. All his senses and awareness were as honest as those of a small child. After a long time, the robot reconstructed the last tissues on the dead individual's head. Now, with the object repaired and, as he thought, taught by his experience of taking over the entire ship, he decided to use the same method, except that, as indicated by the medical instructions, it should be done with a lower electrical potential. His small body once again took on a shape similar to the outline of the ship. And since he himself was a concentration of energy, all he had to do was set it into a very rapid spinning motion. He flattened himself along the edges, becoming similar to a miniature galaxy. He slowly began to shift his negative pole so that the electrons had an outlet, and in this way, using the pattern he had recently learned from the ship, he created his own propulsion system. However, he did not anticipate the true power he possessed, let alone the strength of his new organ for movement. The energy generated in a single instant propelled him forward at tremendous speed. In a fraction of a second, he passed through the hull walls, and in a final instinctive reflex, he managed to shift the pole toward the center of his lower hemisphere. He came to a stop, spinning rapidly. Once again, he couldn't see anything, being blind and disoriented, deprived of cameras. After a moment, however, his memory centers made themselves known, activating at a frantic pace to protect the new existence from destruction. The comparison systems began working at lightning speed, amounting to just a few microseconds. After this extremely brief moment, a new view first emerged as if through a fog and presented itself to his mind, now showing the galaxy in all its glory and a ship quickly moving away in the opposite direction. He didn't wait for his new organ to develop enough to see in all spectrums. It was enough for him to see in the middle spectrum. He shifted the pole of his little body, and this time, with a sense of control, partly guided by instinct, he leapt at dizzying speed toward the fleeing ship. He caught up with it effortlessly. Now he could examine its external structure closely, thanks to the pattern of onboard cameras he had previously retrieved from the computer's memory, which his own comparative systems used to help him create a new optical receptor. When he found himself inside again, he swam back to the medical room where the dead body was lying. For a moment, his mind analyzed the best way to activate the individual lying there. The knowledge he had acquired and logic told him that he should start with the central nervous system. Slowly and very carefully, he began to penetrate through the skull bones into the interior of the foreign organism's brain. This was accompanied by the jerking of the entire body. Electrical charges started running through the neural circuits, reaching all the muscles, which contracted and relaxed. A casual observer would have witnessed a truly comical sight. A creature lying there, sometimes raising one arm, then a forearm, only to start kicking the air alternately with its legs a moment later. Meanwhile, something fluttered inside the small torso, but after a while it settled into a steady rhythm. The chest muscles responsible for inhaling and exhaling also began to work. Translucent eye membranes slid over the large eyes, then flickered, quickly moving across their surface. but the eyelids themselves remained motionless. Something was wrong. He realized it almost immediately. Some of the body's organs took on different functions. The rest remained dead and motionless. He penetrated deeper toward the center of the individual skull and activated his now fully developed, versatile optical system. And besides, he could now clearly feel every nerve connection in which he was naturally now contained. Soon, a new idea and a new strategy began to crystallize in his mind. He assumed that since the central nervous system had not started working at a stage that would allow the individual to be activated, he would have to create an exact copy of the brain connections so that they could replace the dead circuits. For a moment, his own mind searched for the best solution. During this time, the dead body kept twitching, sitting up, then lying back down again, alternately flailing its limbs and bending its 4 fingers on each hand. The electrical potential that had entered the dead individual, along with him, was doing its job, even though, upon entering the foreign body, he had reduced it to a minimum. The organism of the strange being, although dead for who knows how long, had still retained almost all of its bodily fluids. This was due to the specific characteristics of the species from which the individual lying on the operating table originated. A casual observer, equipped with the right knowledge, would know and would certainly point out that beings from this lineage and of this type, much like certain species of earth frogs, are capable of surviving for several months completely frozen in ice. He, however, could not have been aware of this. The only thing he discovered was the onboard life support system, which, as he soon learned, had deliberately lowered the temperature inside the ship in an attempt to keep the already dead crew alive. As soon as he realized that this might be the key to solving the problem of the reanimated individual, he immediately ordered the main computer to raise the temperature to the level specified in the instructions. He waited for a while until the rooms and the still twitching body warmed up properly, but despite his best efforts, the being still wasn't functioning, even when he confirmed that the strange object had already reached the desired temperature. Fortunately, he had an emergency solution to this problem. All it took was for him to start drawing medical and biological data directly from the computer's memory to quickly familiarize himself with the structure of the alien organism's cells. Next, he moved on to the synapses and neurons of the brain. So, after a short while, he was ready for the first act of creation in his existence. He activated his universal optical system to closely examine the network of connections in the central nervous system, paying special attention to the neurons that enabled the studied organ to perform its function. He delved deeper into the structure of a single neuron to learn its construction in detail. After some time, he managed to memorize and recreate in his mind even the smallest detail of the brain structure of the being he was currently examining, so that at a certain point he could already make a diagnosis. Part of the neural network and some regions of the brain were damaged. Despite the system lowering the temperature, in some areas irreversible post-mortem cellular decay had occurred. In this case, he could do only one thing: use the damaged biological material to create new material. After all, even in the face of the decay process, they were still the same molecules. He quickly recalled from memory the process of rebuilding cells and nerve endings that had recently been used by the medical robot to reconstruct damaged tissue. The difference was that at this moment he had a significant advantage over it. Namely, he could regenerate this super delicate material, the brain matter, directly within the organism itself, right in the neural network, something even the medical robot was unable to do. He decided to carefully start with a single cell. Slowly, he assembled molecule by molecule until he built the first cell nucleus. And then, after a moment, he tried to create neural connections. He learned quickly. faster than any biological mind. Soon, the pace of rebuilding the damaged parts of the brain became lightning fast. Now, having mastered to perfection the process of creating living matter, he stimulated it with microscopic impulses, the central centers of selected cells, which were nothing other than biological microcomputers, since their DNA stored all the functions for cell development and division. Where he couldn't rebuild the cells on a molecular level, he stimulated them to develop. In this second case, the process took much longer, but he found, based on information drawn from the system's memory, that this method was much more reliable. Besides that, he was constantly creating a copy of the neural network, running right alongside the original brain connections. The duplicated circuits of the central nervous system were growing at a truly lightning-fast pace. Just copying the neurons themselves took him a few more nanoseconds. The circuits were extending at the speed of a next-generation bullet train used on Earth. But at a certain point, the whole process came to a halt. To his horror, he realized he had run out of enough biological material to copy the network. The decision came almost instantly. A second top table slid out from under the table where the dead body lay, increasing the surface area of the operating station. Moments later, one of the conveyors transported a second dead body and placed it next to the regenerating being. Within seconds, a medical robot was already at its side, carrying out its direct commands through the main computer. One of the robot's arms, now equipped with a specialized device for extracting carefully selected tissue, unhesitatingly plunged the specialized tip of its arm into the donor's brain, breaking through the skull bones with a crack. After all, at this moment, it was just a process of collecting material for construction, and it didn't yet know any moral principles. There was no one who could tell it about them after all. It had come across some references in the system's memory, but not understanding, it dismissed them as insignificant and bringing nothing new to the situation it found itself in. As a result, lying now on the operating table was one of the beings, with a large hole in its head from which bodily fluids were flowing out, while the robot's arm was already moving back toward the head of the regenerating individual with the collected material. Now, this time, with great precision, a thin needle extended from the tip of the arm, carefully aiming at the skull-bone junction, where its thickness was the thinnest. It easily pierced the bone tissue at that spot, slowly moving into the deeper area of the brain along a carefully pre-selected path so as not to disturb the delicate network of connections. When its tip reached the designated spot, the first drop of the already prepared and ground material oozed out from the needle's tube. It collected molecules and entire nerve cells with increasing speed and precision, duplicating the original network. At the same time, it made modifications, creating something like bridges connecting the constructed copy of the neural network with the original in case anything left there needed to be used. Traces of information, which, despite being almost negligible electrical charges, could assist it in the cognitive process. This meant that if anything remained in the memory of the regenerated mind, it would definitely be captured by its copy. Once again, the astonishing pace of reconstruction and copying resembled the implementation of next-generation trains. Except that right next to it, a track identical to the original was being created at an incredible speed. Exactly the same. After some time, the inevitable end of reconstruction and copying finally came. The last nerve endings were connected to the cerebellum, which served as the interface responsible for transmitting impulses from the brain to specific areas throughout the entire body. Only then, when its entire electrical potential had spread out and adjusted throughout the nervous system. He felt the first pain, but it was already too late for him to back out. The suffering and torment he experienced were unbearable. He lost consciousness. The body, which until recently had been trembling due to the accumulated energy in the central nervous system, has now calmed down. The reason for this was that, without him noticing, the emerging copy of the connections absorbed a significant portion of his energy, which naturally just logged itself into the new carrier. No one knows how long he lay there like that. The only thing certain was that when he lost consciousness as a biological being, his connection with the main computer, which he had been communicating with all along on a selected frequency, was definitively severed. At the moment this unusual connection ceased, the main computer system, freed from the complete control of its previously uninvited resident, returned to its original program. A quick analysis of the new situation, carried out by the Intelligent Central Unit System, immediately revealed which steps needed to be taken first in order to save the barely flickering life of the crew member now lying in the ship's medical bay. A careful observer would surely wonder why such a wonderfully equipped onboard medical service hadn't attempted to save the spaceship's crew earlier. The answer was quite simple, and as logical as the machine overseeing the entire space expedition. The medical capabilities of even such an advanced civilization were indeed quite high, but the initial analysis and diagnosis revealed that even if it had been possible to regenerate and repair the damage in time, especially the gaps and losses in the victim's neural networks, there was no guarantee that the revived crew members would retain full mental faculties. Simply put, there was practically no chance of being able to restore their memories, which had vanished forever along with entire sections of destroyed memory cells in their brains. Now, however, the system was faced with a fait accompli. The individual on the operating table was alive and even had a double, intact nervous system. The artificial doctor had to make the only possible decision in this situation: to save. The medical robot began its work. The initial diagnosis revealed complete regeneration not only of the nervous system along with the central center, but also a fully rebuilt structure of all internal organs. All that remained was to administer painkillers due to severely bruised muscle groups and some organs, and finally to slightly replenish bodily fluids. Soon after, the medical robot finished its work, leaving the motionless individual on the operating table, but only seemingly on their own. The sensors attached to the body lying on the operating table transmitted all data to the supervising system. With each passing moment, the body, exhausted to the limits of biological endurance, was coming back to life. Time passed slowly, as every few hours, at the command of the monitoring system and with a predetermined instruction, the medical robot would approach the table, administering and applying healing and regenerative fluids. The breathing was steady and stable, and the organs, serving as the heart, rhythmically pumped bodily fluids throughout the entire network of veins and arteries. As time passed and the body regained its strength, preparing to activate, he, completely unaware of it, was merging with it into a single, unified being. The regenerated brain resumed its work at full capacity, activating all its parts. So, quite simply, it began to dream. In his dream, he saw something he didn't understand, but it was accompanied by a wonderful feeling that he couldn't analyze or resist, surrendering to it completely and with delight. In his dream projection, he saw another being, seemingly just like himself. But somewhere deep in his subconscious, something told him that it was different from him, although he couldn't quite pinpoint what that difference was. She snuggled up to him and wrapped her arms around him. He experienced a strange feeling, one he had never encountered before, and it affected his new psyche so powerfully that he surrendered to it, allowing the dream to continue, completely losing himself in it. Realistic scenes from his former life flowed by in blissful unawareness of the real world existing right beside him. In the next stage, he saw his house, which looked like an upside-down platter, and two beautiful children, all surrounded by strange plants. Suddenly, through a tangle of dreamlike visions, he jumped to some grand event, where he saw himself on the surface of a huge round platform, standing there along with someone who looked like him, dressed in golden shorts. The person was saying something, addressing the gathered crowd, which was packed in front of the platform in tens of thousands, all members of his race. At one point, the speaker stretched out his long arm, pointing his index finger at him. This was accompanied by a ripple through the gathered mass of beings, and a strange sound from the crowd, which sounded like a long "ooh."
Behold the one who will lead us to the stars. Behold, for he is the chosen vessel.
The individual, who is apparently serving a representative function, handed him a pair of silver shorts. He put them on immediately. It was a promotion and a kind of special distinction, which, as a newcomer, he didn't fully understand yet. At one point, there was some kind of jump in the memories generated by his constantly activating dreaming mind, and suddenly he found himself on a launch platform right next to the large spaceship he was currently flying in. The obvious connection between the content of the dream and his current situation was too strong for him to keep dreaming peacefully. His memory generated a powerful nerve impulse, pulling him out of the tight grip of his sleepy lethargy. He opened his eyes, accompanied by the rapid withdrawal of the translucent membranes that had been covering him. He didn't move. He stared at the ceiling, from which a soft greenish light was seeping, gentle on the eyes. The first thing he noticed was the absence of the pain he had felt before. Instinctively, he raised his right forearm to his eyes. He looked at it for a moment, flexing his fingers in the air. A moment later, he tried to sit up, propping himself up on his elbows. It hurt. His bruised muscles and internal organs protested with a sudden wave of nerve signals. The sensors attached to his body immediately responded, sending information to the monitoring system. He carefully lay back down, resting his still heavy head on the headrest. The robot was already by his side doing its job. He didn't react when it injected him with painkillers under pressure. There was a brief hiss from the pneumatic syringe, and the medicinal fluid was introduced into his body. He closed his eyes and fell asleep, feeling the relief wash over him. His awakening memory, regenerating its data, tried to reconstruct all the remnants it could still activate. It did what it could. However, time and again, there were long stretches of darkness in the images it generated. At one point, it came across a record that was still possible to recover, likely only because it had left a particular mark in the memory cells due to the shock it had experienced long ago. They were flying at a speed of 100,000 kilometers per second, still slowly accelerating. Their delicate bodies absolutely could not withstand greater accelerations, so they carefully adjusted the mechanism that increased thrust. No one had ever flown at the speed they were about to reach before. Their experimental ship was built completely differently from the spacecraft they had used so far, and until now, they had never reached speeds greater than 20 or 30,000 kilometers per second on them. Besides, for long interplanetary journeys, even within their own home planetary system, they only used a two-stage propulsion system. Each one operated in a different way. Even earlier, they launched ships from the very surface of their home planet by saturating a certain area of the planet's atmosphere with energy. They also used a gigantic tower, almost 3 kilometers high, which was nothing more than a high-frequency energy generator. Placed further away in geostationary orbit, just above the tower, the energy cannon served as an extension and complement to the tower's function. In this way, a kind of energy channel was created, reaching all the way to the planet's stratosphere, in which they accelerated their ships. Once they reached orbit, these ships would switch to autonomous ion propulsion. Now freed from gravity, with this propulsion they quickly reached the desired speeds, heading toward their target planets. In fact, from the very beginning, their entire ship propulsion technology was based on the use of electrical energy, properly shaped and adjusted by uncomplicated and simple electrical devices, the kind that even civilizations entering the age of steam and the beginnings of electricity start to produce. All of this was shrouded in a certain mystery and treated by the entire community with reverent awe, because only a select few had access to the knowledge and technology, and they mostly came from the castes and families that ruled the planet. Any violation of these age-old secrets by unauthorized individuals was threatened with severe punishment. In reality, it was simply about making sure that no unauthorized person would cause damage or trigger an unpredictable planet-wide tragedy, like, for example, a madman driven by a lust for power who could use a small asteroid to terrorize their entire world by threatening to drop it on some hostile region of their home planet. After all, the result of such a catastrophe could be the destruction of all life on the entire planet.
That's why, in a natural way, a kind of almost sacred institution emerged, directed and run by the strongest group on their planet, which over time practically took over power, becoming absolute. It consisted mainly of hundreds of thousands of so-called priests who, upon joining the ranks of the Chosen, vowed to dedicate their lives entirely to their civilization and the community that formed it.
As memory returns, a forgotten age unfolds. Denied to the masses, Technolaw declared that Revicrits would bring destruction to their entire world.
At the same time, they stood guard over closely guarded secrets hidden from the public, whose violation, according to the law, threatened the destruction of the planet and their world. This time, for the first time, they were carried by a new propulsion system called anti-gravitational. In fact, the ship they were flying in was a giant generator, powered initially only by a small reactor. So, when the ring surrounding the hull reached a sufficiently high speed of rotation, it began to throw out, by centrifugal force, powerful bursts of electrical energy supplied to it by the generator, until at a certain point, it produced more power than it received. At that point, they disconnected the reactor and the propulsion system powered itself. If it weren't for the wear and tear of mechanical parts, they could claim that the creators of this technology had achieved perpetual motion. In this phase of flight, the craft glowed with an orange light. The expelled electrons, creating this distinctive glow, traveled toward the negative pole of the generator. For those familiar even with the basics of electrical engineering, the operating principle was fairly simple. The ring created a pseudo-winding, which normally resembles a spool of thread, except instead of thread, a thin copper wire is wound around it. Now, all you need to do is connect a small current to the ends of the wound wire, and the spool will generate a fairly significant electromagnetic field. If you now insert a short metal rod, similar in thickness, into the inside of the spool, it'll be ejected with considerable force out the other end of the spool. In the same way, using large amounts of energy, the very hull of the craft was ejected with tremendous force from within the luminous glow generated by the ring, which spun at great speed, creating for fractions of a second coils of winding in the form of powerful portions of electrons swirling along its edges. In this way, the propelled object could effortlessly reach speeds close to the speed of light, driven by the immense power of the generated field.
3 crew members sat at the control panel in specially adapted seats. He occupied the middle seat. At the signal from the flight engineer, who was closely monitoring the speed parameters, he would turn a small knob slightly to the right. At that moment, it meant that their bodies had synchronized with the current speed, and the engine thrust could be increased. Despite numerous safety measures, this still caused a noticeable acceleration. To his left sat the astronavigator, who was supervising the flight path and direction. On the right sat the flight engineer, who was in charge of monitoring the readings from the sensors controlling all the ship's systems. They were flying at increasing speed into the black abyss of space, just passing the last planets of their home system. The plan for the final test of the vehicle's construction, with a live crew on board, called for accelerating to near light speed beyond their home system, already in interstellar space. He turned the dial again, increasing the speed. Now they clearly felt a slight jolt as the ship leapt forward. A faint groan from the structure accompanied it, coming from somewhere in the lower part of the hull. They exchanged a meaningful look. At these speeds, even the smallest hidden structural flaw meant disaster. Time, however, was slipping away irretrievably, and they could feel tiny beads of sweat forming on their high foreheads. They were well aware of how much they were risking and how high the price would be if anything went wrong. But then the moment came for another speed adjustment. When control signaled that the organisms had stabilized again, he reached out his hand to the acceleration knob. He gently moved the potentiometer. He didn't even manage to turn it to the intended position. They heard a loud crack as the connections gave way, and the ship immediately jumped from a speed of 150,000 kilometers per second to 250,000 kilometers per second. Their seats were ripped from the platform and, along with them, slammed with tremendous force against the wall behind their backs. The last thing he remembered was the control panel receding into the distance, before, a second later, he plunged into the darkness of death.
And once again, the overlap between his dream memories and his current situation jolted him awake. He sprang up abruptly, no longer feeling as much pain thanks to the medication, and pulled himself into a sitting position. The monitoring device activated the other half of the table, which moved behind his back, creating a comfortable support. He looked around, scanning the room. A robot approached. He didn't react as it removed the diagnostic suction cup ends attached to his body. After a moment, the robot rolled away, taking with it a bundle of fiber optic cables with sensors. Only now did he notice the body lying right next to him, with a huge hole in its head and the surrounding area splattered with bodily fluids. It happened automatically, spontaneously, and so suddenly that he was startled by his own reaction. He said loudly and clearly, "Remove the body and sterilize the room." The space around him seemed to come alive. A sturdy mechanical arm descended from somewhere near the ceiling. It grabbed the lifeless body and, just as it had done with the third crew member, placed this one as well into an elongated chamber that slid out from the wall for the occasion, still steaming with coolant. A moment later, the arm retracted back into the ceiling, and the rectangular cryogenic chamber, along with its recent donor of material, slid into the wall. Somewhere off to the side, several smaller arms equipped with cleaning attachments quickly removed the remnants of the recent operation, carefully avoiding him, and then all of them disappeared just as suddenly as they had appeared. A complete silence fell, disturbed only by the beeping of the medical and control equipment. He remembered quite a lot, drawing on memories that weren't his own, retaining mainly the knowledge he had acquired at universities. But apart from a brief family scene and a few images from his life, preserved due to the strong emotions that accompanied them, he remembered nothing. Still, it was enough for him to manage in his new surroundings at this moment. In some way, he was aware of just how hopeless his situation was as a biological being. On the other hand, however, his true energetic ego, which still maintained a dominant influence over his personality, reassured him with the possibility of eventually returning to his energetic form. Biologically suppressed by painkillers and anti-stress medications, he completely lost himself, surrendering his biological side entirely to his energetic personality. This was a very dangerous moment, because at any time, a wrong decision on his part could determine his biological existence. Fortunately, he decided to act slowly, exactly as he felt. He sat for a moment longer, scanning the room and examining his new form. He clearly felt limited compared to his previous existence. He couldn't move as freely as he used to,